Well, I'm Pam Conrad, and what I do is try to wrangle these computers into doing what I need them to do, which is actually sort of true. It's not really a joke. I spend most of my time these days working on Mars Science Laboratory, and a lot of that has to do with the tactical operations on a day-to-day basis, much of which is done over the internet. So when we hold our planning meetings, we don't meet at JPL anymore. We're now in an extended mission. And so what we do is plan within the time cycle that's allowable between when we get data in the morning and when we have to give new instructions to the rover. Everything that has to happen, from sequencing things that the rover should do to sequencing experiments that the payload will do. So that's pretty fun, actually. And I don't do that very often, a few days a month, but then the rest of the time we spend planning experiments, analyzing data from experiments we're doing. And my specific thing that I pay attention to is what are some of the things we measure about the present habitability potential of Mars, and what amongst those kinds of things could be measured in a stratigraphic record, and what has to be measured in real time and can't be inferred about the past. So that's in a nutshell how I spend my time. Insofar as my normal life goes, before Mars Science Laboratory, I spent a lot of time in analog environments trying to get down this approach for how one might measure habitability by those kinds of factors that might be unique to an environment, and then comparing that with the type of life that you find in the environment to see if you can start to find associations that are predictive. So for example, at elevation on the flank of a volcano, we might measure the direction that the wind is coming from and how much moisture that brings in, and how that affects the distribution of lichen on a ridgeline. Or in a desert environment, we might try to figure out why the patchiness is as it is. We see patchy distributions of life, and that might be because of limitation of resources that are used. It could be water, it could be the distribution of salts, it could be some other types of chemistry. So that's some of the kinds of field things I've done. So that's it in a nutshell. Now, I don't know whether you want me to keep going with background stuff or whether you want me to take questions as we go, because I haven't interacted with one of these before. Do you have any guidance on that, Sanjoy? Yeah, you do have guidance. Okay, lay it on me. Okay. So what Sanjoy put up in the chat window was to ask for some more about my background, and my background is probably not typical for astrobiology. I started out as a musician, and I went to school for that, and I performed for a while, and then I went to graduate school for composing, and then I started a video production company and started composing music for the videos, and then I kind of migrated into producing films and videos about science and medicine. And then one day I just thought, oh, I'd rather be doing this stuff than making videos about it. So I kind of moved from art back to science, and because I was interdisciplinary in nature, having done that, it was kind of natural to choose a scientific interdiscipline as opposed to a pure science discipline. And geobiology was just kind of getting noticed, but it didn't really get noticed to the point that it had funding behind it. So in graduate school, I was suggested by my advisor that I pick either geology or biology, because that way somebody would be willing to fund me to be in their department. And that was good advice because I was able to get funding, but more importantly, I was able to get a really deep background, and I got that in mineral physics. And so I learned a lot about the properties of the earth materials that host life. So as I think about what I do now, trying to understand the distribution of potential life on Mars and the evolution of Mars as a possibly habitable environment, it really helps to have a good understanding of the fundamental properties of minerals and how those properties as individual substances translate into the aggregate properties of rock and regolith and soil. So it's a very, very quick and dirty view of how I got to where I am, but I wouldn't probably have done anything differently if I redid my training, because I think a lot of the things I've learned from music have taught me to understand spectroscopy, and also some of the things I've studied within music about the relationship between cultural context and creativity help me understand the cultural context and the issues that afflict us as we try to come to consensus, understanding our scientific hypotheses. And it also makes me a better citizen when I have to review papers or review proposals, because I can understand a more broad perspective, and it makes me have a better sense of where people are coming from when they write and when they propose, and it gives a much richer interpretation to people's data. I take a very probably fringe perspective. I think that everything anyone does in science should get into the literature. If it's badly written, maybe give help to the authors, but everything deserves an airing, because you don't know what will spin the air around in the heads of the community and help us find a new interpretation on something that we've been stuck on for a long time. And for a topic so complex as what makes a planet become habitable, or what governs the distribution of life, we could really afford to go very broadly and very deeply. And so that means cutting each other a lot of slack and getting everything we can out into the literature. So let's see. I've covered a little bit about background. Let me tell you about my career path. I see that that was posted. And then I'll get to my thoughts about life in the solar system. What I want to tell all of you is, don't expect or demand a conventional career path. I didn't think I'd ever get a job out of graduate school, because I was 47 when I made the decision to be a scientist. And so I thought, well, no one will hire me because I'm too old. And as it turned out, that wasn't a problem. I had enough offers that I could pick. So no matter what excuse you give yourself for retraining or getting additional training as you pursue astrobiology, any background will work and any career path will work. You just have to put yourself out there. So now I'll switch from me, which is not my favorite topic, to life in the solar system, which is a favorite topic. And I work a lot with Sean Domingo-Goldman, whom many of you probably know. And he's a modeler, and so we talk all the time about what the factors are that might affect the distribution of life in the solar system, and what we would need to know empirically before we could really test our models in such a robust way that we would feel confident that we know what to look for in the solar system. It's really very difficult to say what we need empirically, because we haven't really figured that out on our own planet yet. But what we have come to consensus about is that it is more than just the distribution and the phase state of water. There are other things as well, and some of those things have to do with my favorite soapbox, which is, what are the other physical features of the environment? Is there a radiation minimum? Is there a radiation maximum? And also, what are some of the other kinds of physical properties that might affect a planet's ability to host life? Magnetic fields. We know we need some protection from cosmic rays, but a magnetic field is really kind of a first-order phenomenon that gives a second-order effect, and that it helps us defend against cosmic radiation and solar energetic particles. Things like that are important. Temperature extremes, we get fooled all the time because we keep finding new extremophiles which tell us that robustness to thermal fluctuation may be more important than the absolute range. So those are a couple of things that might affect the distribution of life in the solar system. Let's see. Tell us about some analog sites I visited. Okay. I love this topic. Great question, Sanjoy. So my favorite analog sites are cold deserts, and I go there because Mars is basically a cold desert. I've also been to the very deepest part of the ocean, to the hydrothermal vents, and they were spectacular. One of the problems with studying the hydrothermal vents in the benthos is that there's so much life present that it's hard to figure out what the nascent chemistry is coming out of the vent as distinct from the overprint of the biochemistry of the life that forms so quickly and colonizes the flanks of vent chimneys. So that was interesting in that regard. Insofar as other destinations in the solar system might be impacted by what we learn in the analog environments, I vote for the polar deserts still because of our understanding about temperature and desiccation resistance. But in terms of Mars applicability in a very, very specific sense, the surface of Mars looks pretty inhospitable, and I would imagine that if there's life on Mars right now, a good place to look would be beneath the surface. So how far we would need to look beneath the surface determines what analog would be good on Earth. So there is the possibility that deep subsurface would be good, but there's also the possibility that relatively shallow subsurface would be good, and that would be much better for us in terms of exploration because we could actually get to the shallow subsurface. So I'm starting to think much more about caves and how we can measure what the cave does to communicate with the surface. Also to understand how deep you would have to go in a cave before it can communicate with the surface, which has a lot to do with the fracture pattern of the overlying ground and how much meteoric water could make it beneath. On Mars, we don't see meteoric water per se. There is some suggestion that there might be briny waters that could form as a result of the fluctuations in humidity and temperature on the ground, but we don't have that nailed yet. So let's see. So the next question was, what advice would we give for a PhD student just starting? Study everything. Things that you don't even think are relevant turn out to be relevant. I've studied so much weird stuff that I never thought would be important. Like I told you already, the music, electronic music. But certainly getting a really solid grasp of physical chemistry is important. I would also study geology. I would study biology in the broadest array of courses, everything from molecular methods to ecosystem ecology. Not just pure ecology, but studying ecosystems. Systems theory, I think, is really important for understanding the whole planet system. Beyond that, I would say that there are jobs out there, and I myself have looked hard to find postdocs who are interested in doing broadly diverse things, and I'm having a hard time finding them. So if you're a PhD student and you think you're about to be done, send me a letter. So going to the next question, let's see, I've taken a couple of classes, Coursera, Astrobiology, etc. Have you ever looked into this type of class for the interested person? I don't know about the online classes at Coursera, and I haven't looked into it, but I'm very interested in distributed learning. I've taken a couple of distributed learning classes myself in other fields, trying to get a broad background, so I can endorse that as a methodology for learning. It works great. Electronic music fascinates me. I missed your comments. Is there any open source group like Animusic? Interesting. Open source group. There used to be a really active group of musicians in New York, SIGGRAPH, and that was a long, long time ago. It's been probably 15 years before I participated in that kind of open source group. There were codes available. The community of electronic musicians has grown so big that it's hard for me to even address that. But there's a lot of information out there which is easily attainable on the internet, and also through publications like Electronic Musician, which still publishes both in paper and in web version. Let's see. Where do you think life is most likely in our solar system, other than our Earth, of course, and why? Great question. I don't have a clue. I don't know where Earth-type planet environments might be found in our solar system. So that's the caveat to say that I then have to go outside of my brain to think about non-Earth type environments. We, of course, have potential subsurface oceans on Europa. We have other types of potentially interesting chemical observations. Enceladus would be one of those. Titan would be another one. Life evolves as a function of where it begins, so one could expect life almost anywhere, provided you can find some constraints on the amount of fluctuation of variables in a day. The temperature dropping a couple hundred degrees within a diurnal cycle would be challenging because you'd have to optimize these chemical reactions to be stable at too diverse a set of conditions. So things like the frequency of variation could be key. In that regard, I don't think life is available on the surface of Mars. But as I said, you could have subsurface life, and if life got started during the late heavy bombardment, the pre-late heavy bombardment periods, it might still be there. Let's see. What sort of data do I look at when working with the SAM instrument? SAM is a 3-instrument suite. It's all spectroscopic stuff that has to do with mass spectrometry. We do have tunable laser spectrometers, so we measure atmospheric data, composition of the atmosphere, isotopic fractionation of the atmosphere. We measure the same kinds of things from solid samples by pyrolyzing them in evolving gases. We are doing some in situ age dating that's brought to the table by our participating scientist Ken Farley, who's awesome. We're also doing some studies with gas chromatography when we look at evolved gas samples to see if there are organic phases that come off at the same time or the same temperature when we're heating rock, which is powdered. And we do see organic materials. We've reported that. They're chlorinated hydrocarbons. Where we're at right now is trying to understand, are they native to Mars or are they something that's native to our instrument? We don't know the answer yet, so stay tuned. Next question is, what sorts of journals do I follow? Wow, that's a great question. I follow as many journals as I can. Physical chemistry, cybernetics, which is sort of systems theory stuff, astrobiology, International Journal of Astrobiology, biology, Earth and Planetary Science Letters, Icarus, Journal of Geophysical Research, Geophysical Research Letters, Science and Nature, of course. Then things like the spacecraft reviews, instrumentation journals, anything I can possibly get my hands on. And then, of course, I like to read things like New Scientist as well. As diverse as you get input from other fields that might, like I said earlier, spin the air around in your head and help you think of things in a different way. What kind of microbes do we look out for at these analog sites, extremophiles? Great question. We look for everything. The first thing we do is a complete inventory of everything we can observe. And then we try to see if we're seeing trends in functional types. Nitrate reducers, nitrogen fixers, all kinds of things that would be missing to us if we just went after a target group of microbes. So you look to see who's there in the broad stroke, and then when you find that out, you look to see if you find components that would tell you a whole chemical cycle. I'm especially interested in perchlorate reducing organisms on Earth because, as we know from the Phoenix mission and also from MSL, that there is perchlorate on Mars, and perchlorate is a strong oxidizer. So the question is, are there other kinds of chlorine phases that might be oxidizing? Because oxidation and reduction is the primary means of metabolic commerce for microbes as they buy and sell electrons. So it's really important to understand the redox environment. So I'm really interested in that. And so I would be interested in understanding what other types of redox type microbes there are that engage in other places in the chlorine cycle than just perchlorate reduction. So let's see, do we follow the SETI projects? I don't follow SETI very much, not because I'm not interested, I'm very interested, but mostly because I'm just sort of out of time between the MSL work and trying to do this broad stuff, write some papers, finish up a book that I've been working on. And the other thing is that I've just started working with 2 teams of instruments for the Mars 2020 mission. So those require some thought and some planning for how those approaches are going to go. So there's a lot. And so I had to let something go, so I decided I would let my friends who are involved with SETI fill me in on interesting things as they come up. What do I do for fun? I thought this was fun. I love this stuff. I do a lot of things for fun. I think it's really important to have fun in your life. I did a century bike ride this weekend, so my nether regions are a little sore today still. I also do sea kayaking. I live near the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, so that's a pretty good pursuit. And I spend a lot of time, I study a lot of philosophy and theology on the side just because those fascinate me. And wow, I'm a football fan, so I do that too. It's really hard having things to do on Sunday and Monday nights, but such is the life of a scientist. Let's see, do I still get to do music? Yes, I have a recording studio in my basement, and I regularly compose music and play music here and there, but I don't perform anymore because Mars has taken up a lot of time. Let's see, arts to science. Yep, it's pretty fun. Tending to drift away from science to arts. Yeah, go for it. I think life is short. Do everything you can do. You can try to do it all at once. It's a little bit difficult. You can't really. I try. Maybe you'll be able to do better. You're probably younger than I am. Let's see. Is there an opening for something like citizen science that I could point James to? Interesting question. There's not nearly enough citizen science. I don't know the answer to that. We're trying to get something like that going. I've just submitted a proposal last week to do some more analog research that had a huge citizen science component to it, because I want to get back to that. I think we could use that in astrobiology. So I'm just not plugged in enough into the community these days because of just overkill involvement with Mars. So if anybody else has an answer to that, please post it in the chat window, and that way we can all provide answers to one another. Let's see. Yes, you can definitely be an astrobiologist and an artist. So let's see. Transition from music to science. Could you describe a bit more about how that went? So musician to science is not really a big transition. I've always been interested in science and music and theater and philosophy and literature and everything else. You're getting the picture. Everything is interesting. So the fact is, if you open up yourself to exposure to a lot of different topics, you find out you like them and that they're all kind of related to one another in a fundamental sense. So it's not a big leap. What is a big leap is convincing academicians that you have enough background to study the next thing in graduate school. So I had a hard time getting into the PhD program because I didn't have a formal science degree. I had all these music degrees. So I had one kind soul who looked at all the biology courses I'd taken on the side and said, you've had enough biology that we can grant you equivalency of a degree in biology. So that's how I got my foot in the door. You just keep knocking on doors and talking to people and letting them know you're up for doing the work. I offered to take exams to be ranked out of classes. No one took me up on that, but they did eventually let me in. And if you can just get a tiny toe into the door and start taking classes and then perform well enough in them, that's your key to making the transition. Getting the job is not as much of a problem. People like a diverse background, and I know when I'm trying to hire somebody, what I really care about is a smart and curious person. I really don't care what they've studied. I'm starting something completely new at Goddard. I didn't talk about this. It's peripherally relevant to astrobiology. I have a state-of-the-art precision noble gas isotope lab. The purpose of that being to try to understand how noble gas isotopes can inform us about the origin and the fate of organics that they're attached to, because the organics will alter and the noble gases won't. So in that regard, I'm starting all over again too, and that's kind of fun, trying to figure out how to break into that field as an appendage of astrobiology and to convince the astrobiologists that it's relevant. What areas do I foresee being hot topics in the future? Wow. So I think certainly trying to understand subsurface biospheres, I can see it getting more and more popular. That will be important. Also, understanding how to date organic materials, the ancientness of biomolecules, the ancientness of habitability indicators that aren't necessarily biosignatures, but just environmental signatures that are organic. These kinds of materials we've just never really dated. Carbon-14 dating is not really that. It tells you something else. So trying to understand the ancientness of covalently bonded materials is going to be big, I think. I also think getting better climate models applied to other planets is going to be very important for understanding the level of dynamical exchange between a planet's interior and the atmosphere, so we could better understand what biological contributions might be overshadowed by larger scale geochemical contributions. So I think a lot of these sort of pure sciencey things have bigger complexity impacts on astrobiology than some of the more discrete things like synthetic life and some of those topics that really interest me, but I haven't observed a lot of interest rising in those in the field. In terms of specific planets, I think what becomes the next big science is closely tied to where the funding is. So if outer planets get new missions, then the types of life that one might envision in cold places or in places like Titan, which has an active hydrocarbon cycle, those sorts of sciences might become really hot topics in astrobiology. So we just have to wait and see what emerges. It's like surfing. You have to catch the wave right as it's happening, and it's hard to predict when the wave is going to come. But once the wave comes, you can see it, and then you try to get on the right spot. The next question is theology. You'd like to know, do you think religion and science can coexist? Yes, of course. Religion and science are just two different ways of knowing, two different kinds of things. And so one doesn't apply science per se to religion because science is for doing a different set of things. For example, something like biblical archaeology, yes. But trying to understand faith systems in theology, that's an entirely different pursuit. So they coexist in my mind quite well, and in the minds of lots of people in the literature. You can Google many a scholar who is both scientist and theologian. Polkinghorne comes to mind, Sarah Coakley comes to mind. So there's a lot out there in that regard as well. Let's see, could I talk about my mentors? Ah, yes, mentors are really important. When I was doing my graduate work at the geophysical lab at the Carnegie Institution, I had 3 advisors. So there are good things and bad things about that. Sometimes 3 advisors all give you different perspectives, and sometimes they oppose one another. So that's a little tough, but it's great in that I learned how to drive consensus from within, and that's extremely important for planetary missions. I think planetary missions are critical for astrobiology because, at least from the NASA funding perspective, getting to a mission is why we do the research and analysis programs. Even though the science is of fundamental importance, it's going to propel a mission forward. So understanding how we will operate on the surface of another planet is key. And so how your mentors affect your ability to get along with other points of view, and you need to get consensus among those points of view, is important. How not to take things personally. My mentors were really good models for how to take in criticism and how to give out criticism in a constructive way and figure out how to make everything better in that conversation. Science is about conversation, and it's an interactive process of generating, refining, and solidifying ideas, and then being able to let go of them when a better idea comes along. That's extremely important because we're so model dependent. So mentors in that regard teach us how to accept the model, play with the model, and know when it's time to reject the model and come up with a new one. My mentors have been many people who didn't even know they were mentors. Just by watching how they do their research, I continue to have mentors. So, for example, my good friend Andrew Steele has always been a mentor as a colleague, and other people as well, like Barbara Sherwood Lawler. The types of science she does, how she articulates it in her papers, she's a colleague mentor as well. So when you get beyond school and postdoc, you still have mentors. They're just a variety of different people. My boss now, Paul Mahaffey, is an excellent mentor in that regard because he understands a lot of different science, and he understands the measurement approach and how to build the instrument to enact the measurement approach. So put those people in your life so that you have colleagues forever, and you will do yourself a great favor by always surrounding yourself with mentors. And don't think that a mentor has to be someone older and wiser per se. Make sure you include students as your mentors, because students are, in general, going to be very smart and curious. And I started this career so late that most everyone is younger than me, and so it's been a great treat to open my mind and not have a preconceived idea about who would be my mentor and who wouldn't. So let's see. How would you advise someone who has a lack of mentoring while still in school? Find people that whose work you like, or the kind of work that you think you might want to do, and randomly write them. When I did my graduate work, people at the school where I was at, George Washington University, no one was doing geobiology or astrobiology. So I found a guy that I thought was doing some interesting stuff at the Carnegie Institution of Washington, and I knocked on the door cold and I said, "You're one of my idols. Can I be your summer student?" And he said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. How about if we audition you this summer and you audition us, and if we like each other, then we'll see about more graduate stuff." So that worked out, and then the Carnegie Institution basically provided the funding for my stipend all the way through graduate school, which was 5 years, and that turned out to be the best summoning up of courage I ever did. So if you need mentors, write people, call people, show up to them, and you'll be surprised. They'll often show up to you in return. Let's see. Great question, James. Are we going to do eventual missions to Titan? Man, I sure hope so. I'm guessing that you're probably not as old a guy as I am old. But the thing is, it's important to figure things out, like your age, when you're planning to go somewhere that takes about 10 to 12 years to get there. There have been missions proposed in the past. Right now, there's not one specifically on the table. I hope that that will change, and maybe someone will propose this year, as discovery missions are now in the proposal cycle. I'm not involved in any of those proposals because I'm so Mars-centric, so I don't really know what's out there. But if you troll around on the internet, I'm guessing you could probably hear ruminations. Sodium perchlorate. Yes, in the paper and pulp industries. I'm thinking about this. Let's see. So, John Coates, I recall from several years ago in the mid-90s, and Lori Achenbach, I think her name is, had worked on the recognition of a perchlorate-reducing bacteria that was also magnetotactic. And so there were a few different people interested in Mars exploration who started looking at that bug. In the case of that particular one, and I don't remember the name of that microbe, radiation resistance and desiccation resistance they seem to travel together. So such microbes on Earth are probably relevant to Mars science for understanding strategies of chlorine metabolism. Personally, right now, I'm a little more interested in other types of chlorine species and trying to understand what sorts of strategies microbes would have to employ to engage in different pieces of the chlorine cycle, if there is such a cycle on Mars, and we don't know. I think that certainly perchlorate reduction would be important, but also is there a chlorine oxidizing bacterium? Don't know. I'm just sort of guessing these might be interesting things in the future. James, you win the contest. You are older than I am, so I give you that one. Sanjoy, let's see, where was I during the 7 minutes of terror? Okay, this is pretty funny. So when I give a talk, I typically say, the last time I gave this talk was last year, around December. Somebody asked me about the 7.5 minutes of terror, and I said, okay, 7.5 minutes of terror. There are a few spots in a mission when you're really afraid. One is when you launch. The second one is a few minutes later when the launch vehicle separates from the cruise stage. If you don't separate, you end up in the ocean. The third one is when you get inserted into orbit around Mars and you have to get it at just the right angle. The fourth one is when you are lowering yourself down. So the scientists were not allowed in the mission control room. We were in the science sequestration area in another building, and we were all watching the feed live, of course. And so we were all biting our nails and staring at the screen. And so it was very exciting. It was the most amazing feeling when we saw the first image, which indicated that we were right side up because the shadow of the wheels was on the ground and we could see Mount Sharp between the wheels, so to speak, with the lens cover still on our camera. So that was pretty cool for the 7.5 minutes of terror. But the point I want to make is the 588,000 minutes of planning and anxiety and trying to get the instructions to the rover and the data understood that come after the 7.5 minutes of terror more than outweigh the 7.5 minutes of terror in your mind. So I can't even remember that at this point now, except when I stare at the nearly fossilized Mars bar, candy bar, which is still on my desk at home. Let's see. Is it possible that instead of a double helix for life, could there be a triple or more structure of life? Sure, that's a great question. You know, the encoding of genetic material has to be flexible so that you can make new versions of itself. So you want to have just the right amount of stability to be robust, to faithfully replicate and pass on that information to daughter cells. And so I don't know what other morphological strategies might be useful, but one imagines that if you went to more strands, just as is the case with mineral structures, you get a new set of properties. So the question would be, what properties might be desirable in another type of environment that would cause you to want to encode your genetic information in either a slightly more structurally robust manner or in a manner that allows you to take apart, unzip, if you will, the molecule more easily. So those are some of the questions you might ask yourself if you were contemplating alternative structures. Hey, I've talked faster than the questions. Okay, if I were an astronaut on the Mars surface, what would I look for? Oh, wow. Let's see. If I were an astronaut on the Mars surface, I'd look for a hole or indications that I was near some sort of a karst region so that I could get to the subsurface, which would probably give mission control a huge headache. We don't even want to send the rover underneath an overhang or something like that because we wouldn't want to jeopardize the asset, but that's where I would want to go, is straight underground. Indications of that, that's an interesting question because I don't know what they are yet. I haven't gotten a lot of experience in that field. I'm starting to learn those things from my colleague Penny Boston, who's a cave expert. The kinds of structures that we see on Earth that point to a subsurface chamber are different. So I guess one might consider something like gas sensors that at close range look for things like a methane seep or some other type of gas that is not in equilibrium with the largely oxidized carbon dioxide atmosphere at the surface that we see with Curiosity. What else you got? So nothing really is automatic on the Mars rovers. We have to give it instructions every day. And furthermore, we have to take down the data as fast as we can because it would accumulate and overrun the memory that we have available on the rover. We have two computers, a primary and a backup, and then all of the instruments have some kind of memory. We have a memory on board SAM. So every time we do an experiment, we end with a command that the rover gives us to ask for the data and send it to Earth. So when you say automatic, I'm being a little, not disingenuous, but I'm being a little simplistic in that we sequence things, so we script them so they don't take so long to command. So we send scripts on a daily basis that we have composed in advance so that we can make the process happen in a hastened way so that we'll make our time gate to get the instructions to the rover. There are some things that we routinely do, which is not the same thing as automatically done. So, for example, we would never just drive somewhere and then not take images at the end of our drive direction and images backwards so that we know where we ended up and we can get a sense of the rover position and heading. Also, we would always want to take the weather measurements because it's getting the whole data set that tell us how often the weather changes. So measuring the ground temperature, the air temperature, the humidity, the ultraviolet radiation, we wouldn't want to not do those. So we routinely do this so that we'll have a complete data set over time. Same thing with the radiation environment. So that gives you an idea of some of the things we do routinely, which is different than automatically. Do I think carbon and water are necessary for life? Yes. And the reason why is because of their physical properties. The ability of the carbon atom to do covalent bonds is key because carbon not only can do covalent bonds, carbon can do a variety of bond types, so it gives it flexibility. Oops, hold on. Forgot to touch my keyboard every now and again, so my screen just went dark. Because its ability to do these different kinds of bonding gives carbon a flexibility to engage in many types of configurations that make it ideal. And so hydrocarbon molecules are special, and that's why we see it throughout the observable universe. Now water, everyone talks about water as a solvent, yada yada. The hydrogen is key because we use that hydrogen. That's how we make hydrocarbons. Without that water, we don't have the hydrogen. Could we get the hydrogen from somewhere else? Maybe. But water is awesome because it's an infrared absorber. And because it's an infrared absorber, it is our thermal protection. So I like water because of its ability to thermally moderate the environment, in addition to its ability to serve as a solvent medium and its ability to provide hydrogen. Let's see, how much blah. Anything? Let's see. Do we think Curiosity can reach the summit of Mount Sharp? How long would that take? So we are just now, as you have probably seen in the news, on the foothills of Mount Sharp, or the opening materials at the base of Mount Sharp. And how fast we can get up there depends upon how interested we are in all the things that we could see. And we're scientists, right? So we're interested in everything. So good luck to us. Mount Sharp is a 5K. And so 5 kilometers is a very long way. And my guess is that in performing all the experiments we said we would do in our extended mission proposal, which doesn't take us up all the way to the top of Mount Sharp. It doesn't take us very far. It takes us up to certain milestones, sedimentary milestones, that will tell us some things about the evolution of the surface on Mars. So that is scheduled to go out another couple of years. We have, as you know, a power plant that is a nuclear power source, a multi-mission radioisotope thermoelectric generator. And that power plant decays in its ability to provide power by 5% each year. So what that means is that it will take longer to charge our batteries over time. So as we go longer and longer over the next few years, it will take longer to charge our batteries, which means we have to sleep more, which means we can drive less if we also want to do the science. So I have no clue if we'll make it to the top of Mount Sharp, which has never been in the plans, but I can tell you we'll go as high as we can go and continue to do science until something fails. Let's see. What are the thoughts on the $73 million Indian orbiter? Somebody else asked me about that. I don't know the true numbers of the figure of merit for the cost of the Indian orbiter. I only know what its science is going to be doing. So my thoughts are, yay, India. I am thrilled when any country gets a mission up there because we need a lot of assets. And the key to understanding a planet is to look at it as a system. So the ability to look for methane and other species is so important at multiple levels. So the fact that the Indian mission and also MAVEN are there at the same time is, in my estimation, a huge advantage for the citizens of the world, because we can make measurements from two different perspectives on the top of the atmosphere, while Curiosity is still making those same kinds of measurements at the bottom of the atmosphere. We're getting close to time. Any last minute questions? I'll try to answer the next few really quickly. If I were the administrator of NASA, what would change? Holy cow, I don't think I can answer that question because I work for the administrator of NASA. I think he's done a great job trying to get input from the whole community. I think it's really important to have a diverse portfolio to be stable. I think that what I would change would not be what the administrator could do, but I would try to do a better job of getting support from the American people to put pressure on Congress. And I can't lobby. I'm a civil servant, so that's about the extent of what I can say. All I can say is it takes the entire planet to articulate the scientific needs, so please do so. When I might have placed me on my list of heroes, I am not a very good hero, but you can place me on any email lists that you want so that I can answer your questions. I do try to answer them all. I can't answer everything within 24 hours, but I try to get back to people. Adam, which body in the solar system would I most like to investigate? Wow, well, I really do love Mars, but I'd really like now to also investigate Venus so that we can understand the Earth, Mars, Venus triumvirate of inner solar system rocky bodies and see how their divergent evolutionary pathways are a function of where they're sitting. Last words of advice. Anything you do in school gets to be tiresome and a downer at some points if you're not getting the kinds of response you hope you will get. So my advice is never, ever, ever give up. That wasn't me. That was Churchill. But it's good advice, and the same applies to you. I say go for it. Write the people you want to work with. Chances are good they're having as hard a time finding people to put in their labs as what you imagine you'll have as a hard time to get a job. But they're out there. And I'm looking, so write me if you're getting ready to graduate. Or if you're not a graduate student, I'm looking to hire a technician too. You are all very, very welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Bye all.